and Chris Bohig and Ann McDowell, who helped put these talks together. We couldn't do it without them. So we'll just go ahead and turn it over to Tom Peters now. So thanks for coming.
Okay, thanks. Is my mic on? Can people hear me?
No.
Oh, I don't think it's going to turn that little button right there. Sorry, that has to go on. There you go. Yeah, you should be working.
Testing, testing,
Now we
testing.
can
Maybe. How's that? Better?
Yeah, very good.
Leon, I'm looking to you.
Good. You have to talk loud for me.
All right. Okay, well, it's great to be here, and I'm so excited because I can now say I live in Taney County.
Yay!
Okay, here's the pop quiz. Some people can't participate. Have you ever been to McClurg? Do you know where McClurg is? Well, here's a map of Taney County. In the upper right-hand corner, just east of Brown Branch, is McClurg. It's like 2 miles south of the Douglas County line and about a mile west of the Ozark County line. So I call it the Tri-County area. And okay, so most of you don't even know where McClurg is. You ever heard of the Monday, this is a shameless promotion, but we have a old-time Ozarks music jam session on Monday evenings. It's been going on since the 1980s. Every Monday, unless it's snowing or something. Potluck supper at 6:30 and music from roughly 7 to 9. It's great music. So anyway, well, you're welcome to come in. Okay, last part of the pop quiz, and I'll be grading on the curve. What is the population of McClurg?
2.
Oh, I put it right there. All right. So, Joe, there's 2 homes. There was never more than 2 homes in McClurg proper. It was never incorporated, but there's a general store and 2 homes and some outbuildings, including at least 1 outhouse. I don't know if Joe has an outhouse or not, but and so when Joe and I are in town, the town is full.
So how many people come to the museum?
About 35. So there's a general store as well. So it's in the general store that we have the music jam session.
So both of you then are part of that 30?
That's right. Yeah, we count. Sometimes there's a dog or 2 as well. Okay, so I'm here to talk about the Jubilee. So just to make sure we all know, you probably already know this, but it was a live weekly national television broadcast on ABC TV, and it was a national broadcast from January of 1955 to September of 1960. So it went on a long time. Most of the live broadcasts originated from the Jewel Theater, downtown Springfield, South Jefferson, just a half block south of the original route of Route 66 through town, East St. Louis Street. It's no longer standing. It was actually torn down. The Jewel Theater goes way back to, I want to say 1910 was about when it got built. It was built as a vaudeville house, and then it went through, as a lot of theaters go through. They go through, it was closed for a while, and then it was showing movies and stuff. So anyway, when they needed a space for the Ozark Jubilee, they used the Jewel Theater, but it was, one person said, it was a dump. It was not a stately theater. They tore it down in February of 1961, so it didn't last long past the Jubilee area. But now there's a park there called Jubilee Park, and Wayne Glenn, the old record collector from Nixie, just the south side of Nixie, in the 80s, made sure that there was a plaque commemorating that this was where the Ozark Jubilee was. They never missed a week for nearly 7 years. They did a show every week. So now when they do like a season, what is it like? It used to be 16 weeks. Now it's even less than that, I think. A typical show, oh, a new season's coming. Well, it's like 10 shows. They did a show every week for almost 7 years. Now, if you're doing the math, wait a minute, 1955, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, what? He said 7 years. Okay, so, if you ever get a, in a trivia contest, the first Ozark Jubilee was in 1953. It was the last Saturday of 1953. So here on the left is the Springfield Leader and Press, page 14, Thursday, December 24th, Christmas Eve. They had a full page ad because it had just gone on the air a couple of months earlier. KY3 had just gone on the air. So they were selling television. You know, it was like, oh, you got to buy a television, you got to watch television. So they had a full page ad. Maybe you can see Milton Berle there, and Bob Hope, and Groucho Marx, and they had a whole lineup of programs. But then where the arrow is this little ad within the bigger ad, and then I've blown it up on the right. Saturday nights, 8 to 9, starting December 26th. So that Christmas was on a Friday that year. So on that day after Christmas, they're going to have a show called the Ozark Jubilee. Bill Bailey was the MC. So people say, well, who was the first MC of the Jubilee? Oh, Red Foley. No. Bill Bailey was the first MC. They had the Oklahoma Rangers, Tommy Sosebee, Junior Haworth, Speedy, he's also known as Speedy Haworth, and a host of Ozark entertainers. So that was the first show back in 1953. So anyway, I've got more material than I have time, and Leon's got to leave at 1:30. I won't be able to cover everything. I'll just talk for a while, and then maybe at like 1:15 or so, I'll open it up for questions and memories and things as well. So it started off as a local television broadcast, KY3. The KY3 studios on West Sunshine, have you ever been by those? That's where they were. I mean, that building it's been remodeled, probably expanded since then, but that was the same location where they had the KY3 studios, and that's where they had the show as a local television broadcast. Well, it was a hit, even locally, and so they had too many people come for the show, so they were looking for a bigger venue, and that was in the early summer of *54, that they moved to the Jewel Theater. And it really became a stage show at that point. KWTO kept broadcasting it as a radio program, and then ABC Radio picked it up as a national radio broadcast late summer of '54. And then Cy Simon, Ralph Foster, and all the people behind KWTO were negotiating with ABC to have it to have it be a national television broadcast, and that's when it started in January of '55. So '54 was kind of a transition year, but the first show was late in '53. I was not alive in '53, '54, '55. I was born in '57. But my understanding is that national TV, there were 4 networks. No PBS, no cable. It was 4 networks. CBS, NBC were powerful networks, but in the measures of the day, because they were coming out of national radio networks. So they had all the shows and the stars and lined up. ABC and Dumont was the 4th national network, could barely rub 2 nickels together. They were really struggling as networks. And Dumont didn't last too long. ABC, of course, did. But at this time, they had very little money to invest in anything. And some of the people talk about the early history of ABC is like, they'd try anything because what did they have to lose, They were a distant 3rd or maybe even 4th as a national television network. And so Ralph Foster and Cy Simon and others convinced them to try the Ozark Jubilee as a national broadcast. Okay, it was late in '54 that they convinced them, and they announced it in the press and other, it's going to go national now. Then they ran into a problem. They couldn't upload a broadcast from Springfield, something to do with coaxial cables, and so they were like, oh my gosh, we've got this agreement to do this national show starting in January, and we can't do it. Technologically, we can't do it. So they got Ma Bell before they broke up Bell. They got Ma Bell working on the issue, but it was going to take them weeks to get this resolved. So what they did was, Lester Cox was on the Board of Regents at the University of Missouri. And the University of Missouri, KOMU, was their local television station, which was actually affiliated with the university, still is as far as I know. They had a network connection because of football. And so Lester convinced KOMU to let the Ozark Jubilee use it for the national broadcast. I think they did it for 16 weeks. Every Saturday morning, early, they'd all get on a bus and go up to south of Columbia there to put on this show. It was like 24 hours between travel and practice and performance. And they did that every week for 16 weeks. And maybe I'll show you a clip of when they first got back into the Jewel on April 30th of 1955. Red makes a point, this is a big day for us because we're back home, in the Jewel Theater. All right. Anyway, so more than 10 years ago, Wayne Glenn contacted me. I can't remember whether it was a phone call or if he came to my office in the library. So I'd only been in the Ozarks about 2 years. And I'm still getting learned up about the Ozarks. It's a lifelong pursuit. But he said, Tom, I found some Ozark Jubilee kinescopes. We got to get them. I knew enough about the Ozark Jubilee. I knew what he was talking about, but I didn't know much about the Ozark Jubilee. So they were at the UCLA Film and Television Archive out in Los Angeles. And they had about 63 to 65 kinescopes. Now, a kinescope is, my understanding of a kinescope is, literally what it was a movie camera that had been modified so that when it took a picture, made a movie of a television monitor back in the day with the curved, do you remember when a television camera would cross over any of those monitors, they'd flicker? Whenever you saw that, like in a live shot? Well, they solved that so it didn't have that flicker in it, and that's basically what a kinescope is. It's a movie of a television monitor without the flicker. So that's where, there was no videotape back then. Videotape was like this untested technology. It was just starting to come on. So Wayne had found these videotapes. So that started a process that I'm still involved in. So I contacted the UCLA Film and Television Archive. Do you actually have these kinescopes? Yes. I don't think they ever looked at them. They just acquired them. They have all kinds of stuff. Would you sell them to us? No. Where did you get them? Well, as a matter of policy, we don't divulge our sources of our contact. And so this led up, it was like 2 years of negotiating. So basically what the university negotiated for was, we would pay for them to digitize them. And then we'd have a non-exclusive right to do whatever we wanted to do with those recordings, digital recordings. And we're a public university, we're going to make them available to the public free of charge, which is what we've done. So that kind of gave us our seed of kinescopes. We're now up to 152. Kinescope's about 30 minutes long. The show was done in 30-minute segments. And so we've got 152 30-minute segments of the Ozark Jubilee that are just online free to watch. They're great. If you like old television. Truly live television, okay? So, thanks to Janet Jackson, I think. Now, whenever you think you're seeing live television, there's actually an 8-second delay built into that. So if somebody drops the F-bomb or someone bears their breast when they shouldn't be bearing their breast or whatever, they can cut away. This was truly live, so when you see that something happened on the Jubilee, there was no 8-second delay. It was just. So we're very polite. You're not going to memorize these unless you have a better memory than I do. That URL, but if you just search Missouri State University Ozark Jubilee, it'll pop up. It's a dedicated YouTube channel. All right, so let me talk briefly about some of these things. So a typical, I call these things hillbilly variety shows, because that's what they were called. Music back then in the 20s and 30s, it was either classical music. They called it potted palm music because that's where, you go into a nice hotel lobby on a Sunday afternoon. That's what you'd hear was potted palm music. Then they had hillbilly music. Then they had jazz, which was considered too racy and too suggestive for most radio stations. And then, unfortunately, they had a category. The fourth category was called race music. It was like blues and R&B for blacks. So hillbilly music was just one of four types, and it was very popular. And the story is that the whole reason hillbilly music got started, you start doing anything. You start a blog or whatever, you start a radio station, start a newspaper, it quickly becomes what I call a content monster. It's just like, feed me, feed me, feed me. And with radio, when you're listening, if you ever been listening to radio and it goes dead, it's about 2 seconds before you're like, what happened? What happened? You're touching the dials or whatever. Because we have no tolerance for dead airspace on the radio. So there was one night where, it was the radio was live too, so at that time, those were musicians in the studio playing the music, whether it was potted palm or hillbilly music, didn't matter. They were in there playing. So somebody got sick, or I don't know, they were drunk, or who knows, but they were just like, somebody get out there and play something. They had this guy who could play the fiddle, and you got out there and played the fiddle. I think it was at the Fort Worth station, and they got all these letters, like, wow, who was that? We want more of that. So that's how hillbilly music got started as a commercialized thing, was by chance. Okay, so then they developed what are called hillbilly variety shows. So a hillbilly variety show, vaudeville had all kinds of stuff. You'd have animals acts, and somebody spinning a plate, and some fat lady singing, and all that. They had the true variety. Every Ed Sullivan show was kind of the late vaudeville kind of thing. But our hillbilly variety show basically has 4 elements, and it's been that way forever. And it's that we could go to a Branson show tonight, and you'll see these 4 elements. One of them is singing, country music. One of them is playing. You see this in McClure. One of these is playing country music, instruments, fiddle, banjo, guitar, bass, mandolin, that typical Ozarks instruments. There'll be some dancing, and there'll be some comic relief. Those are the 4 basic elements of a hillbilly variety show. All right, so just some of the family acts. The Browns were a big act on the Jubilee. I love this group, the Maddox Brothers and Rose. I think they were from Alabama, and they were poor. A lot of these people that appeared on the Jubilee started off very poor. Some of the men on the Jubilee said, well, it was this or standing behind a mule for my entire life. So, it was a tough life being a country music performer in the 40s and 50s and 60s, but that's kind of what they did. So the Maddox Brothers and Rose were from northern Alabama. They decided to go to California, as a lot of people did, and they actually, between hitchhiked and rode trains out to California, got out to the Oakland area, and they were actually living in, when they did a construction project, they'd have these big pipes, and they'd stack them, 3 high. They were just living in pipes, that was their life. But anyway, they made it big. McCormick Brothers, this is a picture of the Collins kids. Lawrence and Lawrencine were their given names. Larry and Lori, but their actual, their given names were Lawrence and Lawrencine. And they were great. He was quite a electric guitar player. Okay, then the female singing talent, Jean Shepherd. She was married to Hawkshaw Hawkins. Hawkshaw was one of the people that died in that Patsy Cline air crash in '63, I think it was. Jean was pregnant with their second child when he died. But she was a trooper from Oklahoma, and appeared quite a bit on the early Jubilee. Then Wanda Jackson was also from Oklahoma. She made her appearance on the Jubilee when she was fresh out of high school. She was 18 years old, And there she is playing on the Jubilee. That's her on the left there, that's Wanda Jackson. On the right is Norma Jean Beasler. I'm just like a font of trivia knowledge here. You know, when Porter Wagner left the Ozarks, basically, in 1957, went to Nashville, which again, Nashville was still the big draw, you know, going to Nashville. Started his show, which was really a kind of syndicated show. I don't know, for like 6 years before Dolly Parton. Everybody knows, well, Dolly Parton was on the Porter Wagner show. Early on, it was Norma Jean. Pretty Miss Norma Jean was the female sidekick, you know, for Porter. Anyway, but this is before that. Brenda Lee, we were talking about Brenda Lee. She was discovered down in Augusta, Georgia, at a concert in the auditorium there. Red Foley was down there doing a show, and this guy named Peanut Faircloth, who was a local kind of DJ promoter, came up to Red and said, "You gotta hear this little girl sing." And Red said, "Okay." And you know how Brenda could, she had no stage fright, and she had that voice that was just, you know, she'd blow you away with that voice. Red was just dumbstruck by her. So much so that he invited her out during his show to sing a song. I think she sang John Malaya. And he went back and said, "You guys got it," you know, went to the Jubilee folks, "We got to get her on the Jubilee." So they did in March of 1955. So she got her network exposure on the Jubilee. Patsy Cline appeared on the Jubilee quite a bit. I put Betty Ann Grove on here. She's kind of, you know, a lesser light. But, oh, so before I say that, so we've got all these kinescopes that we've digitized. We've got some amazing collections that I'll talk about briefly here. But I've also, for the past 6 years, I guess it's been, I've been working on this encyclopedia about the Jubilee, so that I just got interested in, like, who are these people? You know, I get watching these things, and like, who are these people? So I just do some research to find out who they are, and it ballooned into this encyclopedia. So one of the things I like about it is the you know, the strange things, the little vignettes that you learn about when you're researching somebody. So like Porter Wagner, to get his first guitar, hunted rabbits. They'd sell the rabbits to the postman, because they live south of West Plains, about, I don't know, 20 miles, quite a ways from West Plains. He'd sell the rabbits to the postman. The postman would take them into town and sell them at a little bit higher price. And that's how Porter saved up money to get his first guitar. Another performer sold a pet woodchuck, I think. His first guitar. Anyway, so Betty Ann Grove. She appeared on the Jubilee. She had a boyfriend who was the uncle of Carly Simon, the singer Carly Simon. Now at this time, Carly Simon was like a preteen, as we would say today. But Carly really admired Betty Ann Grove, because when she'd go over with her boyfriend to visit the Simon family, Carly really admired Betty Ann Grove, to the point that she'd learned some of Betty Ann Grove's songs. So here this preteen, and she would belt out a song in the family room or whatever, and it often had adult themes, you know, about, you know, "You were unfaithful to me," or whatever. Little Carly Simon would be belting those out to the family. Okay, then the last person, Colleen Carroll. Everybody, you know, this is a pop quiz. You didn't know you were going to get, and there's no prize, too. Anybody ever heard of Colleen Carroll? She appeared on the Jubilee. She was a good singer. Somebody knows Colleen. Yeah. Keep it to yourself. She appeared, I think, several times on the Jubilee, over several dates. She went on to get married, and then she kind of, unfortunately for women, that was kind of that's sometimes they would sort of drop out of show business because they got married and started having kids. So that's what happened to Colleen. She ended up having, I forget, 5 or 6 kids. One of the last ones she had was a young man by the name of Garth Brooks. So this is Garth Brooks' mother, and we have footage of her singing on the Jubilee. Okay, I'm going to. So then the male. So this is all just, you know, there's a lot of people that appeared on the Jubilee, as my encyclopedia will show when it's finished. So this is just a smattering of something. Of course, Red Foley was the MC during the network broadcast phase of the Jubilee. And he was a big name. And actually, I would like to write Rita Spears Stewart was a local author, and she wrote a biography of Red Foley. I never had a chance to meet Rita Spears Stewart, but is that her last name, Stewart? Rita Spears, whatever her last name is. It's not a very good biography. I think she was, I don't know what happened, but it wasn't very good. So Red deserves better. He left Nashville. So most people wanted, most country western people wanted to get to Nashville. That was the Mecca. He left Nashville. He was on the Grand Ole Opry, on the radio part of it, the Prince Albert half hour. His second wife had committed suicide. He was just at a, I guess today we call it a midlife crisis. His wife had died, had kids. He's kind of lost his welcome in Nashville. So he was looking for something to do. So when Cy Simon came and courted him to come to Springfield, Missouri, he moved his base of operations to Springfield. Well, Nashville, have you ever saw that Ken Burns documentary of country music? Barely mentions Red, barely mentions Springfield, the Ozarks. All that money behind that was Nashville money, and so it's Nashville-centric. So Red has not, he was a big star, sold millions of records, but he hasn't done. So anyway, Pat Boone was his son-in-law. This picture of those, there's a famous scene we've got where they're playing ukuleles. Allegedly, spontaneously, who knows, but they were just playing ukuleles. Of course, Porter Wagner got his start at KWTO. He came to KWTO before the Jubilee went on the air, but he was on the Jubilee. An old performer, Bill Ring, goes way back, but he performed on the Jubilee. A guy from Florida, a young man from Florida called Bobby Lord, named Bobby Lord. The interesting thing about the Jubilee was the older performers had a hard time with live national television because they were used to like vaudeville stages or performing, they couldn't figure out, it was just, early on it was a two-camera operation, but you'll see a lot of scenes where like they're looking at camera one and camera two is the live shot, and it was hard for them to understand. But people like Porter and Brenda and Bobby Lord, they came to prominence during the early television era. So they sort of understood television much better than the older performers did. One of the older performers was Gene Autry. He appeared on the Jubilee. And then, of course, Carl Perkins, kind of the rockabilly, he appeared on the Jubilee and played Blue Suede Shoes. We don't have the recording of him playing Blue Suede Shoes, unfortunately. Okay, then the management team, Ralph Foster, it was called The Skipper. Cy Simon was the There's a great biography of Cy Simon that's out. Kitty Ledbetter, just published in the past year. Highly recommend it. Actually, that's it. Shame on me. Brian was spelled B-R-Y-A-N, Disney. He was the producer-director. His son. So when we started doing this project, and I was, announcing it in social media and stuff, his son contacted me. He lives down in Tampa, St. Pete area, Florida. He said, I got a good collection of Jubilee stuff. Well, you hear people say, I've got a great collection of X, when you see it, it's not that great. But I said, well, he's his son. So I actually made a trip down to Tampa, St. Pete to meet with Brian to see his collection. It's a great collection. So then, this is my pattern. Oh, would you loan it to us so we could digitize it? We'll give you back the originals, and all we want to do is just have a non-exclusive right to put up the stuff. He said, sure. So I brought it all back. Then COVID hit, and so it was years until we got the stuff back to him. And actually, we started talking about it. He said, well, you guys keep most of it. I just want a few things back. So he's given it now, the originals. But he's got some great stuff in there. I'll show you here. Don Richardson was the head writer. Joe Slattery was the announcer. A guy named Les Kennan. So the other thing about the Jubilee, I don't think they ever had more than a 13-week contract with ABC. ABC never, there was rumors that it was the wives of the ABC executives who hated the show because they thought it was lowbrow, as they say. It was popular, but it was not popular with a lot of folks at ABC. So they would never give them a long contract. And they also threatened to cancel it, you know. It's almost surprising that it lasted as long as it did. So whenever they were going to, you know, kind of rattle in their sabers, we're going to cancel the show, Les Kennan would go to New York City to talk them out of it. And Les and Cy would go. John Mahaffey was one of the investors, and of course Lester Cox was a big investor in pretty much everything that Ralph Foster did. It was kind of a sad part. This photo here is, that's Brian Disney. Yeah, Cox, Lester Cox. Yeah, he basically saved the hospital from going belly up, and they were so happy that they named that hospital after him, so that's why it's called Cox Medical Center. This is a staged photo, but that's Brian Disney and Wanda Jackson and Farron Young are administering to his needs.
So Ralph Foster's the guy who has all this stuff out at C of O.
Yeah, that's Ralph Foster Museum. He started he started KWTO and came from St. Joe, Missouri. Came down here. 32, I think it was, when he came down, and started these two radio stations. And KWTO was the one that was really everybody knew KWTO. Keep watching the Ozarks. And then it went from there. Corns are Crackin'. Anybody? Does that mean anything? Corns are Crackin'. That was a hillbilly variety show that KWTO did in the 40s, and it was very successful. It was put on national radio as a radio broadcast, but they didn't have a star. And after a while, it kind of fell apart. And so when they wanted to get a star for the Jubilee, and they went after Red Foley because he was a big star at that. Okay, the other thing is we got ads in these kinescopes, and the ads are, you know, very interesting. So some of the major advertisers were Massey Ferguson Farm Machinery, which was Lester Cox. He had a lot of Massey Ferguson dealerships. He actually started as a Ford implement dealer, not cars, but farm machinery. And then he got into some kind of fight with Ford. He was a big Ford dealer for, I forget, like 15% of every tractor sold was sold one of Lester Cox's dealerships. He was very successful. Then they had a fight. They had a falling out, as they say. And he switched over to Massey Ferguson, which I think was out of Canada. And so that's why Massey Ferguson was a longtime advertiser of the Jubilees, because it was Lester Cox. Carter's Little Liver Pills, those are hilarious commercials. They did a lot of promoting other ABC programs, especially Maverick. So Jim Garner, and I forget the other guy, a lot of commercials. They even had a commercial in 1956 for Disneyland. And the reason was because Disney and ABC had some kind of financial agreement, and part of what so they actually had a show called Disneyland. And it was based around the theme park in Anaheim, California. It wasn't Disney World, that was later. But they had like Tomorrowland and Frontierland. And then, when we started getting these kinescopes, there are advertisements for Regal Pale Beer, one of America's 2 great beers. And I got talking to people like, I didn't know they advertised beer on the Jubilee, and everybody around here said, no, they didn't. So it took a little, those kinescopes came from the West Coast. We don't know, because they wouldn't tell us where they came, But Regal Pale was out of the San Francisco area. I think these were local ads that were running in the California market. But they're hilarious ads. Jim Nars is the spokesperson. He's, now he died a few years ago, but he was, what was his name? Tom, he was a game show host. Tom Kennedy, yeah. But his real name was Jim Nars. So he's announced as Jim Nars. All right. A few places, so I tried to do a little bit like, Branson connections with the Jubilee. Well, let me just state my audacious let me make my audacious statement. You all can, run me out of town on the radio or something. I would say that if it hadn't been for the Ozark Jubilee, what I call the Branson entertainment phenomenon, you all know what I'm talking about, would not have happened when and how it did. Where is a no-brainer? It happened in Branson, and it would have happened in Branson no matter when and how it happened. But the fact that it started right after the Jubilee era, I think it was because all this talent was around, both in front of the camera and behind the camera, and a lot of it kind of drifted down here to Branson looking for opportunity. So Don Richardson, he's the guy who named Silver Dollar City. He was a brilliant promoter. Andy Miller, who did the designs for the scenes on the Jubilee, was the guy who did the basic design of Silver Dollar City. And so a lot of that talent came down to Branson because they were looking for opportunities. So Harold Morrison, one of my favorites is Harold Morrison. First of all, because he's from High Lonesome. Anybody ever been to High Lonesome? I have. It's pretty high and it's lonesome. It's on the western edge of Douglas County. And then after the Jubilee era, he played quite a bit here in town and in Nashville and elsewhere. He was, just kind of a journeyman musician. Good. He's on the right here. And then Jimmy Gately, you often played with Jimmy Gately. Okay, then they had the square dances. So dancing was you remember? I'm like lecturing you here. Of the four basic elements, one was the dancing. They had to have a half-hour segment without some sort of dancing. So we got looking at these things, and when they were in Columbia during that first 16 weeks of the national broadcast, they had the Lake of the Ozarks bullfrogs on. Most people remember the tadpoles, and this is Red Foley dancing with some of the tadpoles. These are the little kids. But the bullfrogs were basically the parents. So the bullfrogs begat the tadpoles in more ways than one. But what the management team discovered was most people don't want to watch 30, 40-somethings dancing, especially that stately kind of square dancing, that slow square dancing. They wanted to watch young people dancing the quick step kind of square dancing. So like the promenaders, it's almost like jig step, and if jig step and square dancing had a love child, it'd be the promenaders. Because they did that. So Jerry Redford, he was an attorney up in Springfield. He's since passed, but I had a lengthy interview with him, and he said he worked a lot of summers at the hotel resorts on Lake County. So he was down here working when he was in college. Then the Wagon Wheelers were a younger group, and then the Missouri Ramblers from up in Webster County were another. But they had a lot of. They were trying to find. They knew that people liked the dance. It was made for television. Dancing on television was perfect. So they'd always have some dancing going on. Okay, then you have the comedians. So great group of comedians. These are just a few of them. So Uncle Syke and Aunt Sap. Oh my gosh, they were old vaudeville. They were husband and wife in real life, and just hilarious skits. Then there was a guy who came out of Kentucky. It was Pete Stamper. He was more of a stand-up comic, and it was very subtle humor. Didn't work too well, I would say, for national TV, but I think it's hilarious once you sort of get into his, almost his delivery. It's like Bob Newhart, who just passed. Part of Bob Newhart's comedic talent was the delivery of it. It wasn't so much the jokes per se, but just the delivery. Smiley Burnett, who'd done a lot of movies with Gene Autry. Ruth Davis. He was, what was it, on Petticoat Junction, he was one of the engineers of the railroad, I forget what his name, Smoot maybe was his last name, the character's name. Ruth Davis was on there. Fran Allison from Iowa was, and I remember Fran Allison, Kukla, Fran and Holly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's Fran Allison. She's great too. She and Red had it. They have some great scenes. But my favorite, Guru Relish. this is Guru on the cover of the 1949, February 49. He's just hilarious, I think, Guru, and we have a lot of footage with Guru. He was often paired with Lenny Aylshire, and then he was also paired with Slim Wilson. A lot of great routines, but he had one they do with Lenny where they'd have like cowbells attached to their wrists and to their ankles, and Guru had one attached to his midriff, and they'd play songs just by, doing hilarious stuff. And then he and Slim Wilson had a routine where they would, they called themselves Flash and Whistler, and they'd sing a song, a duet, but Gugu would always be like, he was always like a half beat behind. And it's just hilarious to see these things. So, great comedy on the Jubilee. Okay, then you had the house band, so Grady Martin, who was quite a session musician, he had the Crossroads Boys, that was the early days of the Jubilee. And then Bill Wimberly and his Country Rhythm Boys were the other house band. And then later years, Slim Wilson was the head of the house band. Then you have like Speedy Howarth, Doc Martin, one of my favorite fiddlers, Zed Tennis from Nixa. So here's a picture of Zed Tennis. And who's that other dude sitting there on the right? Anybody?
Jimmy.
No, that's Chet Atkins.
Chet Atkins.
Chet Atkins. Now, really, this would be like for the all-expense paid trip, 3 days, 2 nights in, I don't know, Cancun. Where are they sitting? This is Aunt Martha's first restaurant. Aunt Martha, she had like 18 restaurants. And she didn't live that long. Most of these people didn't live that long. Red Foley died when he was 58. It was a rough life. You think, oh, you just get up and sing a song, a couple of minutes, It was a rough life for these people. First of all, you're traveling all the time, and this is almost pre-interstate, and no tour buses, you were driving in Cadillac, because you had to have a place for your bass fiddle, and driving late at night, eating restaurant food all the time, a lot of drinking going on. I've seen per capita consumption of alcohol in the 50s. Oh my gosh. Makes us look like amateurs. How much alcohol was being consumed in the 50s. And of course, cigarette smoking too. So they're both smoking here. Anyway, Aunt Martha started 18 restaurants. This was her first. It was called Radio Hut. It was just west of where the old KWTO studios were, right across from the Shrine Mosque. And just across Kimbrough from where the radio, now it's like a Southwestern Bell, I don't know what they do, it's a switching station or something, was this little restaurant called, it was her first restaurant, and that's where we're sitting. All right, but then we have more stuff. So the Jubilee, we got all this stuff, it's great, but then there was the Junior Jubilee. So then again, they tended to drift in terms of talent that they put on TV as younger, and then so they had the really young people as Junior Jubilee. So this is the host of the Junior Jubilee. Then so at one time, at this time, the biggest origination points, they would call them, for network television in the United States were New York City, makes sense. Hollywood, makes sense. Number 3 was Springfield.
Really?
Number 3. So when they had the successful Ozark Jubilee, other networks were like, give us some more stuff, So they did this thing a game show called Pig in a Poke. We've got it. It was only a pilot. Nobody picked it up. It's hilarious. It's so hilarious. I thought it was a spoof of game shows. But it's like Smiley Burnett's the host, and they're giving away. The whole thing was like to get the whole hog. Answer all 4 questions right and get the whole hog. The consolation prize was like a slab of bacon. And then after the Jubilee, so the Jubilee ended, then they did the 5-Star Jubilee, which was a totally different program. It was in color, it was taped, it was done in the Landers Theater. and it was done on NBC. So it was a totally different show, but similar, but totally different. It only lasted, it was kind of a summer replacement show. I already mentioned Corns and Kraken. Then for a while they did what was called talent varieties. And Slim Wilson, this was a nationally televised television program. This is before the Slim Wilson show that was local, KY3. Talent varieties. And that was just, it was more like vaudeville. They would just have, you know, all kinds of acts. It was not country western, it was just
Was Ted Mack around at that time?
Yes, yeah. And he was one of the big ones, big shows. Original Amateur Hour, I think it was called. Ted Mack's Original Amateur Hour. And a lot of the people, what?
And Geritol.
Yeah, Geritol was the, I don't know what they, you know, talk about alcohol. I think the alcohol content of Geritol was about upwards of 50%.
Alcohol. Alcohol was another one.
Yeah. Then they did, Eddie Arnold appeared on the Jubilee quite a bit, but then he had his own show for a while. That came out, originated out of here. Then after the Jubilee era, this is one of my favorite, Farmerama, Lloyd Evans, down in the cave, one north of town there, whatever it's called.
Fantastic
Family
cabin.
Cabins. They do that show down. I don't think anybody, maybe one of the local radio stations broadcast it, but it was just a show, cave show, I guess you'd call it. I want to do an article about research on cave shows. And then, of course, the Slim Wilson show that started in the early 70s, I think, and it actually went longer than the Jubilee, but it was taped, locally broadcast. All right, so, also Mike Bride, Arkansas Red, has a strong connection with Branson. He lives down in Arkansas now. He appeared on the Ozark Jubilee on April 23rd, 1955, and there he has a still from the actual recording of Mike Bride. Somebody just challenged me, like, he must have been less than 10 years old. Yeah, he was less than 10 years old. But there he is appearing on the Ozark Jubilee. All right, I'm going to have to wrap up here. I mentioned Silver Dollar City, and that's Don Richardson there on the left with Red Foley and Brian Disney. All right, so actually I timed this pretty well. So if you want to explore this more, I would recommend the recordings of the Jubilee. Actually, one of my, and then that last thing, real soon now, coming out of McClurg, will be the Ozark Jubilee Encyclopedia. So I passed around my business cards because I'm retiring in 2 months. So if you didn't take one, they're going in the landfill or the recycle bin. So drop me a note, and I'll, if you're interested in getting one of the books. It should be out within a month or 6 weeks or so. All right, there's my contact information, and there's Gugu and Lenny again with their bells on their. And then there's an episode, I can't remember what date it is, but there's an episode where they're doing this routine, and Gugu throws a bat. He goes like this, and the bell goes flying off camera, and he just keeps going. You know, so, all right, let me show you some quick stuff here. Just a couple of. Well, let me do this the right way. So, just so you know, so I've actually got this. Oops. Yeah, so if you poke around a little bit, you can get a list of all the episodes by date, chronologically by date. So I say Mike Bride is, and Craig Amison, who's a colleague of mine, has done. There's the two camera thing where he doesn't get the, somebody's like, good luck with it. So there's just all kinds of good stuff in here. Let me just show you one other thing. I like this one. So this April 23rd was the last episode to come out of Columbia. And then on April 30th, they were back in Springfield.
Kids can really.
I was told by my urologist to throw away all my blue pills.
This is Carter's little liver pills for our generation. So, you know, if you ever want to, you know, if you find yourself just bored, tearless,
Regal Pale, one of America's two great beers. The high-flying, fun-loving Regal Bird, bringing you now Ozark Jubilee. Crossroads, Wisconsin, the Jewel Theater in Springfield, Missouri. It's time for the Ozark Jubilee. Start. Welcome home. Well, we're going to try out a little song here now. Thank you so much, folks. Thank you. Thank you. Well, so we got a wonderful crowd here tonight, and this is the big night, I want you to know, for all of us connected here with the Ozark Jubilee. We know we've moved our permanent home here to Springfield, and boy, we're having a big time here at the Jewel Theater.
so that was their first show in the Jewel Theater. And imagine how relieved they were that they didn't have to get on the road like at 5 a.m. on Saturday and want to get back to the wee hours of Sunday morning doing those shows. Speaking of which, I'll end with this. So I said it was a tough life. A lot of these folks, they would tour just about every other night of the week. And one time, they always did a show. They didn't miss, as far as I can tell, they never missed a week from the final Saturday of 1953 until September 24th of 1960. They did a show every week. But a lot of them, and sometimes, you know, they did shows like Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve one year, fell on Saturday. They did a show. So on that New Year's Eve show, Harold Morrison and some other folks, they did the show, they got in a car, they drove to Ava and played at the New Year's dance in Ava from 9 to midnight. They didn't stop at High Lonesome on the way, too. So, I mean, it was a rough life. That's where they made their money. They didn't make much money appearing on the Jubilee. They got, you know, union wages. It was like $35 to appear on the Jubilee. But, as Red Foley once said, we've got 9 million people watching us. You can spend your whole life doing personal appearances and you won't get to 9 million people. You sing one song on the Jubilee and you can suddenly got 9 million people. It was advertising for their records, their personal appearances, all the stuff. They didn't do T-shirts and that kind of stuff. But although they did have, you know, they had stuff. They sold, the Jubilee sold memorabilia, but it wasn't like it is today. So that's what fueled their careers, was really making the personal appearances and eventually record sales too, late in that era. So it wasn't appearing on the Jubilee, but most people say Wanda Jackson was like, she loved being on the Jubilee. She felt it was, she didn't like Nashville. She didn't like the Grand Ole Opry. She liked the Jubilee. And she said it was because it was like it had a family atmosphere. People were rooting for everybody to make, you know, if somebody got a big hit, everybody's proud of them and so happy for them. And really, I would say that Red Foley made the show because he's one of those entertainers, you know, Carol Burnett, Red Skelton. There's certain entertainers, they just walk onto the stage and you feel like you've known them all your life. Yeah. They just have that ability to project warmth, and you know me and I know you, and Red Foley was that way too. Now, he had his demons, but he was very, very charismatic. All right, thanks for your time and attention. Any questions, comments, rebuttals?
You had the Browns on there at first.
Yeah.
They're the ones that came out with the song in 1959, Little Jimmy Brown.
Yeah,
Remember that?
yeah, yeah. What was there? Jim Ed, Maxine.
Jim
Yeah,
Brown, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And she wrote a book that the University of Arkansas Press, which is a pretty good book, about their lives. And,
At the Jewel Theater, what would the typical attendance be on a show night?
usually it was sold out, and it was this way in Nashville too. Most of the people came from out of town. Really, a lot of out-of-state visitors would come in to see the Jubilee. Not so much Springfield people. And during the summer times, they'd have so many people come in town, they'd do 2 shows. You know, they do one, depending on where, you know, they kept changing their time slot, and once they went to Thursday nights for a while, you know. Usually it was an early evening show in the central time zone, it'd be like 6:30, 7 o'clock it would start. And then they'd like get everybody out of the theater and fill it up again, and they'd do the show again, just as a stage show, because they had so many people.
Several hundred, or what was the?
I think it was 1,100 when the 1,200 when the balcony was open. They charged $1, and I think 50 cents for kids or balconies. Before they closed the balcony later on because they were worried about structural problems.
Tom, I read somewhere that Slim Wilson and Aunt Martha were brother and sister. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and Speedy was Martha's son.
Hmm.
Those 3 were all related.
I saw June Carter in Bradleyville. I came to see a
Really?
theater in Bradleyville, and
Really?
they brought her down for a show.
Well, you know, in 49, the Carter sisters, Mother Maybelle with Chet Atkins came to KWTO. And they had, and again, it was like, when you had a show at 7 a.m., you had to be in the studio at 7 a.m. It was live.
Mm-hmm.
And so they do a show, because the girls were still in high school. And they lived out over by Glenstone. The house is no longer there. They rented a house. And their dad would drive them in like for a 7 a.m. show. And then they'd go to high school. And then I think they had over the noon hour, they had and radio shows were generally 15 minutes. So they just do their 15-minute show. And then they go back to school. You know? They only stayed for about a year. So I mean, imagine the Carter sisters, Mother Maybelle and Chet Atkins on KWTO, but they couldn't hold them for a year. 49. They left spring of 50 because Nashville made them a better offer. So again, imagine 1950. You know, they had Homer and Jethro were here. You know, they had a lot of really big name talent here, but they couldn't hold any of them. And imagine these, you know, Ralph Foster and Cy Simon. Spring of 1950, they must have been in the dumps, you know. How can we can't keep them here. And between spring of 1950 and Christmas of 1953, they figured it out. And the Jubilee is the result of that. I mean, it's amazing that they just kept at it, you know. And finally it worked.
Part of that may be because they embraced television,
Yeah.
right?
And actually, I was going to say, you know, when I started this, these many years ago, I thought it was all about the technology. That the emergence of television gave Springfield a chance to unseat Nashville. Because Nashville never really figured out television. They had a show, it was taped, and it didn't do well. I thought it was all about the technology, but ultimately I think it's about the people that were involved in the show. There was just an amazing group of people that were involved in the show.
You're talking about Aunt Martha. So is that the same Aunt Martha's Pancake
Yeah.
House?
Yeah.
Is the Pancake House still going or no?
No. And what she did, because she really started literally like 18 restaurants. She'd start a restaurant, get it going, whatever it took, a year or two, then she'd sell it. Okay, so here's a story. Wayne Glenn is there. Everybody heard the story that Willie Nelson came. Willie Nelson never got on the Jubilee. He came to Springfield, tried to get on the Jubilee, back when he was clean cut. And he never got on. And then he didn't have enough money to get out of town. So the story is that he was washing dishes at Aunt Martha's, the one over on Glenstone, which is now like, I don't know what it's called, House Council. It's like a home decorating store. Not true. Not absolutely true. He did wash dishes at an Aunt Martha restaurant, but it was at the Corn Crib, which was just south of the Jewel Theater on South Jefferson. And Martha had already sold it, so there were different owners of the restaurant when Willie was. Willie and his wife, so they had 2 kids, and they didn't have any money, so he probably worked nights, if I know Willie. I don't know Willie, but if I knew Willie, I'd say he probably worked nights. She'd work during the day, so they didn't have to have childcare. So they just sort of tag team working at this restaurant. And got enough money to get out of town, and the rest is history. But they were not working for Aunt Martha. And it wasn't at that one. The last restaurant she had was the Pancake House, but it was the Corn Crib, downtown Springfield.
Yeah, but Willie Nelson was another fine example of people who hated Nashville.
Yeah. And there's some, and the other thing, so amazing group of people. Were there any dirty, rotten scoundrels in the group? I don't know. There's a guy named Dub Albritton who was Brenda Lee's manager. Actually, Lou Black, he was a local guy. When Brenda was making it big, he signed on to be her manager. And then he died of a heart attack like 2 weeks later. So then Dub Albritton saw an opportunity, so he became Brenda's manager. He remained her manager until he died. But she was always a underage performer. And when she came of age, there wasn't much money there. I don't know, I'm not gonna, all I can say is there wasn't much money there when she became an adult. And she'd been performing all these years as a child, as an underage minor. So he's one. The other one that, wasn't really the best person. The other guy was Bob Tubert, who was a writer. And he went on to be kind of a semi-bigwig in Nashville. He wrote a book. I've never gotten a copy of it, but he wrote a book where he just allegedly said some very unflattering things about the whole operation. He thought they missed their opportunity, and he tried to tell them what to do, and they didn't pay attention to him, and all that kind of stuff. All right, sorry to end on Bob Tubert. Sorry, Bob, he's going to be a great reward.
Just like to say a comment, you mentioned Ted Mack. I had an older sister that was a good singer, and she won a local contest in Iowa and got to go out and try for the Ted Mack hour.
Yeah.
She didn't get on it, so I always questioned they didn't really know good talent.
Well, who knows, but a lot of talented people, it was almost like luck, I think, sometimes, how you would get noticed and why her and not her, or why him and not him, and, it's hard to say. It's an amazing business, a tough business, though, too. All right, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Tom.